This is a Q&A lesson for my Patreon followers. So I'd like to thank all of my followers on Patreon. Sometimes I ask them for their questions and I'll do these little Q&A lessons. If you're interested in my Patreon or joining it, just follow the link below to the support page and you can check it out. But as always, you can just follow these lessons for free. So John asks, how do you choose your program and order of pieces for a recital? That's a great question, and I think you have to balance two things there. On the one hand, you have to balance how you feel comfortable presenting material. So a lot of performers will start out with something that is relatively easy to play because you first walk out on stage, you might have a little bit of performance nerves, so it's great to pick something that you know really well and that isn't too difficult so you can kind of get comfortable performing. I especially do that for my students. If my students perform like a set of pieces, I'll have them start with something that they performed last year and they've performed 100 times. That way you walk out on stage and your first experience on stage is something really positive that you can definitely do with your eyes closed. It's good to play a piece, even if you're sick of the piece almost. It's exciting to perform it still and you pick something you know. But it all depends on what you're after, because the second side of it is what does the audience want necessarily, or what do you think, how do you think it would be easiest for the audience to digest the material you're going to present? If you're going to play some really thick, heavy music, you don't necessarily want to present like long, heavy pieces at the very end of the recital, necessarily. Depending on whether you think your audience will start drifting away from you or not, you have to keep them engaged. And so some players will organize their program chronologically. They'll start with early music and progress. Other players will just simply go for contrast, right? You open with something maybe exciting, and then you do something nice and slow. Maybe you're more abstract or slower pieces while you still have the audience's attention. And then you can end the first half with like something super exciting that gets them all riled up again. And then you have like a little intermission, and then after that you can do the same thing again, and you end with a kind of a finale style piece. But there's so many ways to go about this, and there's no right or wrong decision on this particular case. But like I said, as a student of guitar, or even as someone who gets like a little bit nervous, and I like the nerves that I get when I perform, but some students do get quite nervous in front of an audience, and so I would start your program with some pieces that you just know really well. And the great thing about playing recitals is that you don't have to present a program all at like a super high level. You can mix and match. You can play some super easy material that's high quality still, but super easy material and some super difficult material. And that's the pleasure of it all. You can really program some super easy stuff and then throw in a really difficult work in there too. So for students, I often like to start with those easy works. Jonathan asks, how do you bring your own interpretation to a piece when we are often influenced by what we have already heard from other players? That's a good question. To some extent, Jonathan, I would say that we are our influences, and that is very valid, and that's a good thing. Each person has a number of influences coming in, and the combination of your personality with those influences and your technique level and your musicality level, the mix of all those things creates something unique. And it's not stealing from other people's performances, because that's just what we do. We are influenced by things, but each individual combines those things in different ways, which is part of the joy of it. But there's another side to it. Often when I'm playing a piece, if I dive a little bit deeper into performance practice, like the history of the piece, the history of the composer, the music theory behind the piece, if I dive into those things, it's not that I want to be like snobby about performance practice, like playing it in a historical way, but what I want and what I'm after is musical ideas, things that I can work with. So quite often I will be influenced by a certain performer because, you listen to someone play a piece and you're like, that's a good performance. I want to play it like that. But you can also dive into other things and discover something else. And I've never researched a piece and not found something, right? And I'm always influenced by that something that I find. So I think for a lot of students, like really researching the composer and the time period and some of the music theory behind the piece or the genre or stylistic aspects of a piece. So for example, if you're playing a Baroque guitar piece, like written on Baroque guitar, sometimes there's strumming in there, and a lot of modern editions edit out the strumming. So you can experiment with some of that. All of these things will lead you to new ideas that you can present as your own and try things out. But again, especially as a student, don't be afraid of imitating someone. It's a great exercise in musicality. You know, you get some ideas from someone and you try to present those ideas. It's not copying. It's a form of flattery to the professional that you're influenced by. And I think it's very rare that you would be influenced by only one person. But it's a good point that you bring up. And I think the fact that you're even just thinking about it means that you can probably, when you're approaching a piece, you can start thinking about whether you're imitating just one person or influenced by just one thing, rather than a number of different influences coming in, and whether you've actually made musical decisions. Sometimes we just play with our musical instincts, but other times we should make clear musical decisions. You should think about playing in front of a panel of jurists or teachers where they might ask you like, oh, now why did you do that in that section of the music? And why did you play forte there? You know, you can ask yourself those questions and start to build up good justifications for it. And those justifications are just musical decisions that you've made. And sometimes they'll just be because of your musical instincts. And other times you'll have chosen it for a very specific reason. And the more that you know the reason you've chose it, the more unique your performance will probably be. And the more valid, you know, in some ways. Or at least more thought out, right? Jonathan also asks, I sometimes find that a high tempo can lose some musicality and become more of a physical demonstration. I do like contrast and acceleration though, so I'd like to know your thoughts on this. That's a good question, and it's different for every player. You know, if you have a piece and you're trying to play it fast, you might lose some musical aspects, but then you gain so much other ones. Like you can really be cooking along and have a strong sense of rhythm. Sometimes the musical phrases will actually come out better because they've been compressed into more digestible moments. Long phrases can be hard for audiences to understand because you'll lose them along the way sometimes. But when you slow down a tempo, yeah, you can replace it with other musical aspects. So instead of tempo and rhythmic drive and short compact phrases, suddenly you can have more careful attention to each note or to the way you shape a phrase with more dynamics maybe. You can have more longing on certain notes, more attention to the exact sustain of notes, but then you miss that rhythmic drive, right? And I think for students, it's really important to balance those things. Professionals are going to aim for, performance practice in terms of like what's appropriate for the piece sometimes, and they might also be thinking in terms of their recital, how they've presented pieces that go next to that piece in terms of choosing their tempo. But as a student, you definitely want to balance your musicality. And for most of the time, for most of my students, let's say students at the grade 10 and below level, you should be slowing your tempo down and replacing it with more musical ideas. So I think you're right in the fact that, especially when it comes to students, high tempos can sometimes interfere with the presentation of musical ideas, or musical ideas can be sacrificed by having a high tempo. So yes, but lower the tempo and increase other musical elements. And you always want to be thinking of a table that's somewhat balanced, you know. If your tempo is way up here, but your musicality is way down here, then you have a little bit of an issue. You've gone too far in one direction, unless it's super appropriate for some reason, either because of the piece or because you're trying to do like a special finale that's an exciting display for some reason. It has to be appropriate though. But you can always think about evening out these graphs. This is musicality and this is tempo. You can think about, oh, let's lower the tempo and raise the musicality so that they meet a little bit more. And again, lots of pieces have tempo indications, like that Carcassi excerpt I just played has andantino. So andantino is kind of like a brisk walking pace. So it's not a run, it's not supposed to be driving. It's probably just supposed to be quite lyrical, like a moderate tempo. Just like a nice, you know, not too fast, not too slow. So those tempo indications usually give you an idea of what a piece should be like. But again, it doesn't always matter what the composer says. I mean, it does, but when it comes to student performances, if you're sacrificing too much and your graph of musical elements is out of whack, then you should readjust it, just because as a student you want to present a certain level of musicality and a certain amount of tempo, but not have too many sacrifices. You want to be building up a balanced performance to some extent. So that's all you have to think about, but I think all of the questions I've answered today really come down to one thing, is have you thought about it? Have you thought about ideas about why you've done what you've done? And if you've really thought about it and you've had input from other people like teachers or other players, you can ask them, like, do you think my tempo is too fast? Do you think I could slow my tempo and replace it with more dynamics? You know, you can ask people these questions and they'll tell you if you really let them know that it's okay to tell you. But it's something you just need to ask and make sure you're exploring. And if it's in your mind and you're turning those ideas over, then I think you're safe. It's the danger from people is more when they do things without thinking about it or without planning it. Sometimes you can run into dangers that you didn't try or didn't experiment enough, so you didn't reach a better musical result because you didn't try to reach a better musical result. You didn't try to explore the ideas. So that's the important thing.